So back in 2021, when my videos were even worse than they are now, I made a quick little video about a game that had received some publicity from a couple articles that mentioned the comedy of combining a certain other franchise that I won't mention just quite yet, and guns. While a lot of the coverage surrounding this game was predictably about the comedy of starting up sweatshops in a survival game with cute little creatures, I decided to actually look at the developer's track record of games made up to this point. Considering their previous track record was an abandoned card game with middling reviews and an abandoned early access game that shared shocking similarities among assets and trailers with Palworld, I took it as a sign that this early access game was going to release as a buggy, broken mess. Regardless, I would buy it day one, because of course I was going to. In the time between my video and the year 2024, a lot of things happened, namely Palworld getting delayed from 2022 to 2024. In that time, the developer seemingly changed quite a bit from what the trailer initially showed, from overhauling the cartoonish look of the world to adding a lot more pals and fleshing out the systems in which they interact with the world. Come the beginning of this year, I remembered Palworld was set for release, and I prepared to play it and record it, expecting a mess of a game like I had described earlier. Suddenly, the gaming community was inundated with news about Palworld from people who had gotten early access codes, talking about the game and hyping people up for it. And then the game released and sold 1 million copies in no time. Then 2 million, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 19 million people had purchased or played this game. This game set records for concurrent player counts on Steam and nearly dethroned PUBG for the concurrent player count record. Nearly overnight, this indie game boasted sales numbers that rivaled the franchise it was seemingly parodying. When it comes to other monster catching games, no one had truly come this close to toppling the Rat. This has to mean the game is good, right? Now, to preface me talking about this game, let me clear the air a bit because discussion surrounding this game has been absolutely psychotic. If you like the game, you support AI art, theft, and the collapse of gaming. If you dislike the game, you support a multi-billion-dollar corporation, anti-consumer business practices, and the collapse of gaming. While there's seemingly no winning when it comes to discussing this game, allow me to clear the air surrounding some of the things you might have heard about Palworld before I actually talk about it. First, there's no concrete proof that this game used AI to generate the designs of the pals. While Pocket Pair does have a game that uses AI and the CEO has tweeted about liking AI, Palworld itself did not use it as far as we know. You might say the CEO's tweets about AI are proof enough, but every CEO likes AI, so this doesn't really mean anything. Being unlikable is 90% of what being a CEO entails, so stuff like this seems par for the course. And secondly, this game is not going to get sued for stealing models. There's not evidence models were directly lifted, and yes, I know a statement exists from a certain company, but this statement means nothing and honestly sounds like they're just sick of people sending them Palworld clips and putting out a statement to say, yes, we know this game exists. Fuck. With all that cleared up, I think I have a strong enough reputation to be able to call this game what it is without someone posting this image and thinking they're contributing anything to the conversation. Palworld is slop, from its presentation down to its fundamental components. The entire game is built solely on the basis of, I think it'd be fun if we did this, with no further thought on whether or not it should be in the game in the first place. And I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I'm now seemingly above enjoying slop just because this time it's from an early access game in a genre I'm not big on. Palworld is fun, about as much so as a puddle. The idea sounds fun, and I have fun jumping into it, but I hit the bottom fast, and then I'm left standing there with soggy shoes. I will say what Palworld does best is that it managed to trick 19 million people into playing Ark, or Conan Exiles. But seriously, its survival mechanics, unlike usual entries into this genre, are pretty easy to understand from the get-go, and progression feels pretty quick in the beginning stages of the game. Having the pals you go around and catch become your workers is a pretty smart thing to do, because it begins to automate a lot of the early game grind that turns people off to this genre, while also allowing you to explore while still feeling like you're progressing further into the game. This is without mentioning that PC players seem to eat up survival games like crack, regardless of their overall quality. Rust, Ark, Conan Exiles, DayZ, Valheim, etc. all come with a level of jank that the average player base is willing to accept because, well, there's nowhere else to really experience this type of gameplay. This game also happened to follow the rising trend of an indie game releasing and it just becoming the game you and your friends hop on to play for a while. BattleBit, Lethal Company, and now Palworld have all been co-op multiplayer experiences. I'm willing to bet a lot of people tried out this game because their friends DM'd them about it. With how how accessible Palworld makes its survival mechanics, and the general feeling of exploring a world and coming across new creatures to catch and employ, it's no wonder 2.1 million people hopped on to play this game at the same time. Praise out of the way, issues began to appear when I actually started getting deeper into the grind of Palworld. The way the game is marketed makes it feel like you'll be running around with guns shooting these little creatures in no time, but the truth is, after about 11 hours, you'll probably have your first gun. Maybe. By the time you do get your first gun, which is a musket and kind of blows, even if it is what God intended for man to fight these creatures with, the shallowness of the game really begins to show. When you're not grinding for stuff in your base, you're meant to be out in the world exploring, challenging boss towers or boss pals, or rescuing pals from raider camps. But outside of personal ambition to have a bigger guy with better stats, there's no real reason to do this. The bosses are incredibly stupid, as are all the AI in the game. There's no sign of tactics or strategy, they just choose to run at you and deal damage, or sometimes they'll just run into a wall or get stuck in a wall. The point I'm making here is the game's pretty buggy. I began to wonder why I was even really exploring this world in the first place, and I managed to boil it down to 3 reasons: pals, dungeons or bosses, and resources. At a certain point, your base becomes like 95% self-sustaining, especially if you strategize your second base correctly by essentially building an ore farm. The only reasons to go to dungeons is sulfur, unless you just buy all your ammo at merchants, or for alpha pals or ancient technology parts. As for bosses, they really just give you XP. I see no other reason to show up for these, especially when, as far as boss fights go, they're pretty boring. This leaves the last and final reason to leave your sweatshop: catching more pals, which was personally the main thing I was interested in when this game was announced and what I bought it for. All right, brace yourselves because I'm gonna break the glass, and it's time I mentioned the P word. Pokemon, Pokemon, Pokemon. Despite the astounding amount of discourse surrounding this game, neither side truly understands what the real issue is behind the designs of Palworld's pals. Once again, the models aren't AI generated, and with the current information we do have, there's no solid evidence that Palworld straight up stole Pokemon's models either. The real issue with pals is that, from admission of the company and their CEO, they're not in the business of creating an original set of creatures for the world, or an original game for that matter. Which means I can look at 80% of the roster of pals and let my brain instantly make the connection to which 3 Pokemon they shoved into a blender to form them. Not to mention, while again, there's no definitive proof of anything being stolen, a few specific designs definitely feel that way. However, what people don't seem to understand is that yes, Pokemon does not own the rights to certain concepts, and at some point, if you ask people to make a hedgehog creature, you can only come up with so many unique designs. What Palworld actually took was Pokemon's core design philosophy. A lot of people like to post this image right now to show that Pokemon itself isn't entirely original with its concepts. But this image just ends up proving my point, because you would never mistake a creature from Dragon Quest or Digimon or Temtem with a Pokemon. My friends that played Palworld never even attempted to call these creatures pals, and some have even asked me why these new Pokemon look so weird. If I had to be honest, I think there were only at most 3 or 4 pals in the game that I caught and thought looked good enough to actually be Pokemon, which is sad because one well-designed Pokemon pretty much solos the entirety of Palworld's lineup. And you'd think with the mount system in the game, that should be motivation enough to go out and catch certain pals, because why run or walk everywhere when you can ride a pal instead? However, I'm convinced they just included this because it was an arc and didn't think about how the pals would actually interact and move about the world. Like mid-game, I found this guy and he swims. That's his gimmick. Why am I the same speed as him in the water? Or better question, why is the flying mount faster than him? What's the point of this guy being mountable specifically to ride around in the water if he's slower than my flying mount that doesn't get tired hovering over the water forever? And I'm aware there are in fact faster mounts than this, but to get them requires sheer luck or hundreds of hours of egg breeding for very diminishing returns. I can't bring myself to care about these creatures because they have no identity of their own. Okay, so long-winded rant about Pokemon over. What does that mean? It means that when I'm running around to catch a bunch of pals I have absolutely no interest in owning or employing, I'm left to explore the sights and scenery of a map that feels like it was bought off the Unreal Store library. Sometimes I even get to find the Everjails from Elden Ring, or the churches from Elden Ring. Rarely, I might even get to find a lifeless town where I can buy stuff from merchants that make going falling into dungeons nearly irrelevant. Incredibly rarely, there are raider outposts across the map, and in theory you could have fun freeing a PAL from people looking to sell it, but in practice you just end up steamrolling guys on 300 ping stuck walking into walls. And it's sad because Palworld attempts to have some world building, but throws it out instantly because it either just isn't implemented yet, or they haven't thought about how it would be implemented. Like, there's 2 islands at the edges of the map, and they're described as these sort of wildlife sanctuaries for PALs. What makes them so special is that stepping foot on the island and being spotted by the guards will immediately make you want it. And I'd love to show you footage of that, but it never happened to me because my friend and I found out you could just stay on a flying mount the whole time. And because you're flying, your feet never actually touch the ground, which I guess is a requirement to become wanted. So you can just taunt the guards all you want, go around and slaughter or catch these rare PALs, whatever. Why world build? We don't care about original concepts, we just care about fun. With none of those things around, despite the same 3 to 5 PALs stuffed into a certain region, the map is well and truly barren and lifeless. I'm talking Sonic 06 solely on a forest hub world levels of empty. Past that, the game overall feels incredibly unpolished, and not in the it's an early access sense. I can't help but think that everything it does well wasn't a purposeful decision from the developers, and was instead just a stroke of sheer luck after mashing other games' mechanics and features together, with no real thought about how they should fit in and interact. For example, this is a survival game, so naturally Palworld comes with a hunger mechanic, a motivator for you to find food and eat it. But there's no real punishment if you run out of food, not even on hard mode. Starvation just means your health will sit at 1 HP, but you won't die. There's not even a penalty to your stamina regeneration. You can just run around forever with 1 HP and never eat. Not to mention there are a plethora of foods to cook, but no reason for you to not just farm and eat cooked or raw berries. The only difference with the other foods is that they fill you up quicker. Hundreds of best food in Palworld articles, yet no real world replacement found for farming berries and clicking berries 20 times. And sure, take it from Reggie, if the game isn't fun, why bother? Clearly 19 million people and counting find some form of enjoyment out of the slop, and for that I'm glad that some of them don't feel like they wasted $30. It's no surprise Palworld did get this popular. The idea of Pokemon with guns combined with a genre PC players are practically addicted to leaves little room for the game to have fallen flat on its face. Not to mention any jank Palworld might have inherently come with is looked over because, as I said earlier, people who play this genre are used to jank that's probably worse than whatever Palworld is offering. And you get all of it for $30 with no microtransactions or DLC and free updates promised to be coming soon. A lot of people find that to be more than enough. I definitely cannot recommend Palworld in its release state or even currently after its first couple round of patches. Don't get me wrong, if you're fine with everything I listed above, don't let me stop you from having fun with your friends. I still believe that's ultimately the reason most people ended up enjoying this game through the slop that it is. Just keep in mind that it's shallow, and if you're one of the people looking for a Pokemon experience on the PC, I'd keep looking, or even just wait the 2 years it'll take for Palworld to be either the Pokemon killer people want it to be, or a survival game worth investing your time into. If you enjoyed this video, consider watching another and subscribing down below.